I always like to plant those seeds like, hey, here's my contact information. Here's my buy box. If you have a property that is overly leveraged, has a low interest rate, and the seller is motivated, I'm your guy. We're not going to undercut. We're not going to lowball. We're going to buy that property subject to that existing mortgage through a trust acquisition. For those who don't know what a trust acquisition is, it's quite simple. We're not closing on the property. We're closing on the seller's trust. So each and every property is going to have a unique trust. Think of the trust as an envelope. We're placing the title and mortgage in that envelope, and we're closing on the trust. We're not closing on the property. By doing so, the seller has beneficial interest on that trust, right? So the reason why you guys are getting hung up on when you're talking about sub 2 is it exposes both the seller and the buyer. How does it expose the seller? Well, here's 3 ways. 1, each and every mortgage has an alienation clause. What is an alienation clause? Well, anytime you alienate the title of the property from the mortgage, the lender can and will call that loan due. They call that loan due, that's no bueno for both buyer and seller. With a trust acquisition, because we're creating a trust unique for the seller, it's the seller's trust. Therefore, they're going to have beneficial interest in their trust. Now, mind you, it's only going to be about 10%. But by them having beneficial interest in their trust, the lender will not be able to call that loan due to the Garn-Saint-Germain Act of 1982. So our president, Ronald Reagan, back in 82, created this law called the Garn-Saint-Germain Act of 1982. Learn it, love it, believe in it. This is going to allow you to level up above and beyond your competition, because your competition is pitching sub 2. We don't want to do sub 2. We want to do sub 2 through a trust acquisition. Tear down this wall. Yes, I love that. Love that, Chris. Okay, benefit number 2, numero dos. This is probably one of the most important benefits for a seller, because if you're buying the property sub 2, what happens? You take title of the property, you're walking with that title. Well, guess what? That mortgage stays in the seller's name. So guess what happens to their debt to income ratio? It's out of whack. They're unable to qualify for another mortgage. Not true with a trust acquisition. Since we're buying that property, closing on the seller's trust, seller has beneficial interest in that trust. So therefore, the income coming in to that trust is going to offset their debt. They're going to file a Schedule E when they do their taxes, therefore now allowing them to do what? Buy another property. Bingo. We're now happy about that, right? There you go again. There you go again. So there is no due on sale clause, wipes out DTI. Last but not least, one of my favorites. Well, what happens if the buyer fails to make a payment on a sub 2? Well, guess what? You're going to have to file a foreclosure to get that title back. That's not a lot of fun for anyone, right? Not the case with the trust acquisition. Title is not walking away from the seller. It's placed in trust. So if it's placed in trust, guess what? If the buyer fails to make a payment, the trustee simply pushes the buyer out of trust. So any down payment during the inception of said trust, any principal pay down during the course of that trust is now the benefit of the seller. So no need to be concerned with a foreclosure because the buyer is not walking with title. A couple other benefits you guys might want to know. Write this down. With a sub 2 purchase, guess what? The buyer can lien the property. They buy that beautiful 3-bedroom, 2-bath house and they decide they want to put a pool in the backyard. Well, guess what? The contractor doesn't get paid to put that pool in the backyard. And what happens? The contractor places a lien against that title on that property. And that is no bueno for the seller if the seller has to foreclose on said property. Now they're taking that property back with a big old nasty lien on it. Can't do that with a trust acquisition. Trust does not walk with the buyer. Trust is basically holding title, so the buyer cannot lien the property. Last but not least, bankruptcy. If the buyer files a BK, that's no bueno for the seller. And if the seller files a BK, no bueno from the buyer. The trust protects the buyer from the seller and the seller from the buyer. So if the buyer files a bankruptcy, that is in direct violation of said trust. And now the trustee can do what again? Push the buyer out of trust. So when I'm talking to sellers and I'm like, the worst scenario that you could potentially look at in this situation is I buy this property, God forbid, 3 years down the road, I fail to make a payment. All right. So the seller just captured that inception or down payment. They've realized principal pay down over those last 3 years. And what has happened to the property? Well, more than likely, it has appreciated some in those 3 years. So if I were the seller, I would almost want the buyer to fail to perform because now I just got the property back with money in pocket, principal pay down, and appreciation. You guys take notes? You guys get that? This is my mission. This is what I do for multifamily, both large and small. My buy box is Midwest, 1 to 4 units. And I do so through a trust acquisition, sub 2 in it, baby. I am going to make some phone calls so you guys listen to me close and